talk about constraining sketches now and do a little activity with that. So I'm going to go ahead and create and click new, and I'm going to name the document that I'm creating sketch constraints, and then I'm going to go ahead and select my and put my initials in. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. When we have our document open, the first thing I'm going to do is come up here to the document menu, and I'm going to select workplace units. And so this is where you can select the units for your workspace. And I'm going to go ahead and click the drop down, and I'm going to say I want this document to be in millimeters. Then I'm going to go ahead and work to create a sketch. So I'm going to click sketch. And in this case, we're going to want to sketch on the front plane. So I'm going to go ahead and select that front plane. And then I'm going to select the front from the cube here. I'm going to come over to my default planes, and I'm going to turn those planes off so I don't see those planes anymore. And so the first thing that we're going to do is create some sketches. And so I'm going to go ahead and click the line tool. And I'm going to start at this origin point, and I'm going to drag a line out. The distance really doesn't make a lot of difference right now, so I click, and I'm going to create that line. I'm going to go up and create another line, over a little bit. I'm going to come up at an angle, vertical. And I'm just going to click and create a shape that looks something similar to what you see here. When I get to the bottom, I'm gonna hover down until I see that orange dotted line come over, and that means it's lining up with the bottom line of our sketch, and that's what I want to do. Then I'm going to go ahead and hit escape. Tool that I'm going to show you is the extend tool, and so it's underneath the scissors over here. I'm going to go ahead and click extend, and I'm going to click that I want to extend this line to that point. All right, and so now we have one line that goes over that point. That makes up the bottom of our document. I want to show you guys a couple things now. If I click and drag these boxes, I can make this shape look really crazy. And so it's totally different than the geometry that I originally created. And so the reason that is because there haven't been constraints applied to this sketch. And so I'm going to go ahead and go back. I'm just going to click the back button until I get something that was similar to what we started with. So I'm going to go with right there. And what we have are what's called geometric constraints. And so sometimes these geometric constraints are applied when we're creating our sketch. So if you look at this geometric constraint, if I hover on this bottom line here, you can see that it has a coincident constraint. It has several parallel constraints, and so this is the parallel constraint. Those are what those are. And it has a horizontal constraint. And so if I go ahead and click delete sketch entity and delete all of these constraints, from the sketch, I'm able to then move that line kind of however I want to move it. And so that line isn't defined anymore. Now, if I want to go ahead and add some geometric constraints back to that line. So I'm going to get it looking something similar to this. And I always want this line to be horizontal. So I'm going to make it horizontal by clicking the horizontal constraint and selecting the line. Other constraints that we can use, there's a perpendicular constraint here. So if I always want these two lines to be perpendicular, I can select them. Again, if I hit escape, I can hover over the lines and I can see what constraints are applied to that geometry. So this line has a vertical constraint applied to it. It has a perpendicular constraint applied to it between the baseline and the line itself, and it has another perpendicular constraint between those two lines. And so that's one way that you can add constraints to geometry to create different shapes. So I'm going to show you a couple other constraints that we're going to add. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click up here. I'm going to get a new line, and I'm going to hover over this top line until I get a square. And that square is the midpoint of that line, so it's the exact center. And notice how I get a conceded constraint, which is going to place the line that I'm getting ready to create. It's always going to be placed on the exact middle of this line. And so I'm going to click and I'm going to drag a line down, click and let go, and I'm going to draw a line down, and I'm going to find the middle of this bottom line, which is right here at this point. All right, then I'm going to go ahead and hit escape on my keyboard to get rid of the active command, and I'm going to click on this line that I just created, and I'm going to make it a construction line because it's just going to be used for the construction of our shape here. So to do that, I'll just click construction right here, and notice how it changes to a different line type that represents a construction line. One thing that I'm going to want to do, I'm going to go ahead and click vertical, and I'm going to make this line vertical. And so you see how that changed the geometry of my sketch. Now this line is angled. I don't want that line to be angled, so there's different things I can do. I could say I want it to be perpendicular, or I could have applied a horizontal constraint to it. And if I hit escape again and now mess with the geometry of my design, notice how that geometry moves some, but it's not it's as free as it was before because we have applied some of those constraints to it. The next constraint we're going to look at is the equal constraint. So I'll click the drop-down menu, I'll select equal, and what this does is it makes two sets of geometry always be equal to each other. So let's say that I want, I'm going to hit escape to make this look a little different for our sketch here. So let's say that we want this line to always be the same as this line. I can click those two lines and it will make them equal. Same thing with this. Let's say I want this line and this line to be equal. Now they're equal. Now if you look at this line on mine, it's not horizontal. If we want it to be horizontal, I can select the line, which I do want it to be horizontal, and I can make it horizontal. I'm also going to make this line and this line equal, these two lines equal, and then I'm going to hit escape. And so what I want you to notice now is when I move my sketch around, these lines are always staying equal, all right? So this line and this line are always going to be the same distance, and that's what we've decided with those geometric constraints, and we put them in. The last thing that I'm going to do is, again, I hit escape. Notice that I can move the object around. Notice how the object is not on our origin anymore. So to get it on the origin, I'm going to click the conceding constraint, and I'm going to click this dot, and our origin dot. And now those dots are going to be, it's always going to stay right on that origin. It's not going to move anymore. So again, I can still play with some of the geometry, but there have been some limitations added because of these constraints. All right, so those are all the different geometric constraints that you can use. The other kind of constraint that we're going to talk about really quickly is the dimensional constraint. And so right here is a dimensional constraint. If I select that, I can click this bottom line, and it's going to give me a dimension. If I type in that dimension, let's make that one 100. You see what it does to our geometry. I'm going to add a few more dimensional constraints. I'm going to click on this line right here, and let's make that 15. I'm going to select this line, make that one 20, and I'm going to select this point and drag out a line, and I'm going to make the overall height of our object 45. I can add a dimension here. Let's make this one 20. So I'm going to make a dimension right here, and let's make this one 20 as well. And you can see that once I've done that, that all of these lines that I've created within my drawing here, within my sketch, have turned black. That means that this sketch is now fully constrained. And so if I hit escape now, I can't move the sketch. I can't edit it in any way. I can edit a dimension by double clicking it. And let's say I want that to be 50. It'll edit that dimensional constraint. But once I've applied all of these dimensions and the geometric constraints that are on this object, the object is fully constrained. And so when we're working with sketches, we want our sketches to be fully constrained. And so that's a little bit about how to create constraints within sketches in Onshape.